Welcome to the Easier Way to Sell presentation of Close the Deal Without Selling. Here's your host and developer of the Easier Way to Sell, Ike Krieger.
I think you're going to find this episode very enlightening. Not only do we go over more of the Easier Way to Sell guidelines, which gives you a firm foundation and exactly how to go about using the language contained in Krieger selling. And then we're going to move into a review of both the YES formula and a little more detailed review of QUICK. QUICK is the system that we use for selling. It reminds you to qualify, uncover the problem, find out if there's a budget, find out who the decision makers are, and finally to gain knowledge as to why your prospect is interested in buying. Because when they do that, basically they are closing themselves. I think you'll find the information contained in this episode from beginning to end very helpful. So let's get started. Over the course of the last few episodes, we've been examining each of the Easier Way to Sell guidelines. And these guidelines can be found on page 15 of the Close the Deal Without Selling Action Guide and Training Manual. Let's do a quick review of what we've covered so far. The first guideline is Seek the Truth. Think of it this way. Just because you believe something is true, that doesn't make it true. It just makes it true for you. You need to uncover the truths held by your prospects. And you might want to consider writing this guideline down and pasting it on your bathroom mirror so you can start your day with this thought in mind. And once again, that is just because you believe something is true, that doesn't make it true. It just makes it true for you. Next on our list is we're all in sales. And this guideline reminds us that we're all selling all of the time, yet nobody likes to be sold to, but you have to sell to live. Well, this system champions the idea that you should give up the need to sell and just have an authentic conversation with your prospect. And notice, I didn't say give up the commitment to sell, but rather the need. And that brings us to guideline number 3, which is talk less and sell more. I'm inviting you to shift your truth about selling and self-promotion because we as humans, especially as salespeople, love the sound of our voice. This guideline reminds us that we would probably be more effective if you could give up the notion that to inform is to sell. Your job is to get information rather than give it. And the best way to talk less and sell more is to conduct a sales interview rather than a presentation. Well, what is a sales interview? And if you're going to be an interviewer, you need to stop thinking of yourself as a presenter. You need to think of yourself as a doctor. So, unsurprisingly, the fourth guideline is think like a doctor. A doctor can and should be your role model. Doctors examine and diagnose before they prescribe. You probably prescribe before you diagnose. Doctors ask open-ended questions. A doctor remains committed, authentic, and neutral. Doctors wait to get all pertinent information before they prescribe. Now, the next guideline urges you to be a problem solver. And for the purposes of Krieger selling, you need to remember that a problem exists when there's a difference between what you have and what you say you want. And with that in mind, a definition of business and the mission of your business revolves around solving other people's problems and getting compensated for it. And the third rung necessary to reach the goal of being an effective problem solver is to understand that closing a sale occurs when your prospect comes to the conclusion on their own that your product or service will solve their problem. In our last episode, we discussed the sixth guideline, which is know the problem you solve. It's not enough to know the solutions you provide. You have to be aware of the problem you solve. And the easiest way to identify a problem is to think of a potential client saying to you, I get really frustrated because, or I get really frustrated when X happens, or I get really frustrated by. However that sentence ends is the problem that you should be solving. And also keep in mind that people don't care about what you do or how you do it. All they care about is what you can do for them. People want you to help them solve their problem. People want you to help them get from where they are to where they want to be. Now, let's move on to the seventh guideline, which is be a trusted guide. It's easy to go into a sales appointment with the mindset of selling something you and your company believe a prospect really needs. This guideline reminds you to find out where they want to be in the form of their desired outcome. Your job is to discover that destination and help your prospect get there. If people knew how to get to their destination on their own, they would. But since they can't, don't want to, or don't know how to, they're looking for someone they trust and feel comfortable with to act as a navigator. You wield far more authority when you're the one helping people get to where they want to be. This is in stark contrast to you trying to take them to a destination of your choosing. Let's add on another guideline. Number 8 is be an expert questioner. If you're pretty much like everyone else, you probably weren't taught to ask questions when communicating with others. You were taught to rely on show and tell. But remember this, the person asking the question is the one that controls the communication. The one doing the talking usually dominates. Your prospect has something to say, so help them say it. Learn to ask open-ended questions. Use the diagnostic-style open questions employed by doctors in most clinical conversations. You'll be well on your way to being a more effective communicator and salesperson when you learn to ask the right questions. In our next episode, we'll move on to the next set of easier way to sell guidelines. And if you would like to get a copy of the easier way to sell guidelines and you have not yet purchased the Close the Deal Without Selling action guide and training manual, you can get a sample copy which includes these guidelines. Just go to closethedealwithoutselling.com, scroll down the page and see where you can get your free preview of the Close the Deal Without Selling action guide and training manual, and you'll find this list on page 15. Over the last 58 episodes of the Close the Deal Without Selling podcast, I've had some interesting insights about this sales system that I created in the late 1980s and the early 1990s. And these insights have led me to make some changes. And these changes aren't big, but I believe they're dramatic. These are shifts in language, process, and context, which are now part of the easier way to sell. And these changes will help you be even more effective using this system. In this penultimate episode of Season 1, we'll close the same way we started. We'll review the selling system. Only this time we'll do it with these amendments in place. So let's get right into it. The entire Krieger selling system is based on a 5-step strategy called the YES formula. And let's agree that a formula is a combination of ingredients that ends up producing a predictable result. That's what you have in the easier way to sell, a combination of communications ingredients designed to achieve a predictable sales result. And here's an important reminder. Because of the yes formula, the easier way to sell is designed to work 100% of the time, and it doesn't. However, when you use these 5 steps, you will see your appointments turning into sales more easily and more often. And here are the 5 ingredients of the yes formula. And as with any formula, all the ingredients must be present for it to work. First, you have rapport and relationship. Second, you need to establish mutually beneficial agreements. 3 is can, curious, authentic, and neutral. And 4 is open-ended questions. You must ask open-ended questions. And number 5 is quick, a step-by-step conversation guide. Quick is a process which uses 5 stages to clear a pathway to yes or uncover a no that was going to happen anyway. And this yes formula will help you identify and enhance existing rapport. It'll help you remain curious, authentic, and neutral in your communication. It will aid in your quest to ask only open-ended questions, and it will give you the freedom to establish mutually beneficial agreements. That will help you quickly, no pun intended, qualify or disqualify a prospect during your sales interview. Now, to go back over these, the first ingredient of the yes formula is R&R. R&R stands for rapport and relationship. Effective communication thrives in a rapport-filled environment. People buy from and do business with people they like and they trust. And like any relationship, personal chemistry is either there or it's not. However, if even a small amount of chemistry exists, you can enhance this rapport with friendly tools from the easier way to sell. And if there is already an abundance of rapport, you'll learn to recognize that and maintain it. Rapport exists when the unconscious similarities between individuals are more noticeable than the differences. Basically, when people are like each other, they like each other. Rapport leads to authentic relationships in which most people are willing to let down their anti-sales shield. You cannot have too much rapport. The second ingredient is can, C-A-N, and you'll be more effective as a problem solver when you learn to remain apart from the problem itself. When your goal is to get information rather than give it, you'll find it easier to remain curious. So the C in can, that stands for curious. Curiosity helps create an environment in which you're viewed as a committed solution provider rather than as someone who's trying to sell them something. And when curiosity is the filter through which you're communicating, it's more likely that you'll obtain higher quality information. And this is because your prospect will become noticeably less guarded in their response. The A stands for authentic. And authenticity is missing from most business communications. As a matter of fact, authenticity is missing from most communications. The yes formula will help you remain authentic. And when you communicate authentically, you'll promote a more fruitful dialogue. And it's a challenge being authentically authentic. Authenticity means being your true self in any positive conversation. And you have to remember to avoid the urge to sell. You have to remember to have an authentic conversation, which brings us to the first shift in context to what we call authenticity. You see, most of us have a hard time nailing down which of our daily multiple personalities is really us. You're one person with your partner. You're one with your children. You're one with your employer. You're one with your clients, and one when you sell. But which one is the real you? How can you call on your authentic self when you need to? The aha I experienced was during a conversation about, of all things, platonic relationships. And I found that that's the key. How do you nail this shift? Well, treat every prospect as if they're a platonic friend. When you make a recommendation to someone with which you have a platonic relationship, is it okay for them to say no thank you? Well, of course it is. Would you feel rejected, or would you chalk it up to the fact that your platonic pal is expressing their honest opinion? So, although we will continue with can, you can think of it as curious, platonic, and neutral. Now, the last letter in CAN, N, stands for neutral. Neutrality in your communications produces powerful results. And when you're neutral, you're objective. When you're objective, you can remain curious. Remain committed to your outcome, but not tied to it. Be committed, but not needy. And CAN will help you remember to focus on solving the prospect's problem rather than yours. Curiosity and authenticity have a tendency to slip out of the equation whenever you're focused on solving your own problem. When you're tied to your outcome as a path to solving your own problem, it's difficult to remain neutral. It's difficult to make a sale. Remember, give up the need to sell, not the commitment to sell, but the need to sell. The next ingredient of the YES formula is MBA. MBAs offer you the opportunity to establish rules for your communication that make that communication more effective. What do you mean, rules for the communication? What do you mean, rules for selling? Are there rules for selling? Well, the reason you and most other people don't like to deal with salespeople is because you never know what to expect. After all, there are no set rules in selling. Your prospects have rules that they follow. You have your own rules, which are usually designed to break through the rules of the prospect. The Easier Way to Sell offers a set of simple rules and guidelines, and these guidelines make the process of selling easier and more pleasant. The YES formula helps you remember the rules you need to establish.
Think of setting up these rules the same way you do when you play the game Monopoly. Everyone knows how to play the game Monopoly, but you can't start until you are clear that you're following the same rules.
Now, as a traditional salesperson, your main tools are talking, educating, and handling stalls and objection. As a diagnostic problem solver, your main tools are asking questions, listening to the answers, summarizing, and then asking more questions. And the YES formula reminds you to ask a particular style of question. Open-ended questions. Open-ended questions are the most valuable information gathering device available. In the YES formula, OEQ stands for open-ended questions. And let's face it, you weren't trained to ask open-ended questions. And what are open-ended questions? Well, open-ended questions begin with who, what, when, where, and sometimes why. You're used to asking and answering closed-ended questions. Closed-ended questions are questions that can be answered with a yes or a no, but do not necessarily stimulate the conversation. Think of it this way. Open-ended questions open a conversation. Closed-ended questions close a conversation. Learning and using the right open-ended questions will make your sales efforts easier and less stressful. Now, as an aside, I want you to be selective in choosing your clients. Being selective about who you do business with should not be looked at as a product of success down the road, but one of the main causes for that success. Quick will help you uncover a no that was going to happen anyway, and this discovery alone will help you shorten your selling cycle. Now, the final ingredient in the YES formula is quick. The letters QUICK stand for qualify and actually disqualify, which means that you have to find out if your prospect is willing to follow a set of mutually beneficial agreements for your communication. And what should you do if they don't agree to your MBAs? Simple. Avoid problem clients. We've all taken on clients that in our heart we knew we shouldn't have. Don't do it. Avoid problem clients. Trust your intuition. If they don't want to play the game by the benign agreements you're requesting, you should thank them and move on. You have enough problems with your non-problem clients, so to take on a client that you know is going to be a problem is insanity. Now, once your prospect has agreed to your mutually beneficial agreement, and most will, you then start to uncover the problem. How do you do that? You use open-ended diagnostic questions to discover their problem. These are the type of questions a doctor would ask, and you'll find dozens of these diagnostic questions starting on page 176 of the Close the Deal Without Selling Action Guide and Training Manual. After uncover the problem, we move to investment. Find out if they have the time or money to solve the problem. C is capability. Learn if the person has the authority to spend the money to solve the problem. And K is make sure they're clear on why they want that solution. Find out how and why they're making the purchase. When you use these ingredients, the ingredients contained in the YES formula, you'll be more effective at identifying new prospects and even existing clients that are ready, willing, and able to do business and want to do business with you. Plus, you'll move from all that stress to success in selling. Now, let's walk through this portion called Quick by itself. It's important that you remember that this system was designed for one portion alone of the sales cycle. That portion is commonly known as an appointment. This system answers the question, what do I say and do in an appointment that will most likely end up in a successful sale? I remind you that you go into the appointment with your single page of notes, and there's a sample on page 306 of the Action Guide. It's on this page that you've written down a series of open-ended questions that you've decided upon in advance of the meeting. Also at the top of the page is what I call the first MBA, or the prelude. Now, this prelude has undergone a transformation of sorts since I started the podcast, and here's the wording I suggest you now use. And let it be known, though, that the language offered in the Close the Deal Without Selling Action Guide is every bit as effective as what I'm about to share with you. And I believe that this new version is a bit kinder and gentler and maybe even a little bit more authentic. Now, you've entered into the appointment, and it's important to remember all the phases of the YES formula with the initial emphasis on R and can. Now, after the initial hellos, it's time to begin. And to paraphrase Elvis Presley, it goes something like this. I'm more comfortable in these appointments finding out if there's a fit between us before I start giving a presentation. Now you might say my spiel or my demo. But if it's okay, I've got a few questions that I'd like to ask you, and you might have a couple to ask me. And based on my experience, within a few minutes, we'll know whether or not there's a reason to move forward. Is that an okay way to start? Now, WFA. And once again, this is probably the most important three initials you'll ever come across in sales. And that's wait for the answer. Woofa. They will say, yeah, sure, that's a good way to start. Here is your next statement. And if anywhere in our conversation you decide that what I have to offer isn't what you really need, how comfortable are you telling me that? Woofa. For our purposes, the prospect has responded with a yes. I'll be comfortable doing that. You say, what I really want to avoid is a maybe or I want to think about it, because in most cases when someone says maybe or I want to think about it, it's usually just a polite substitute for what? Woofa. The prospect will say no. You then say, if you really need to think about it or you need more information, that's perfectly okay. I just want to avoid those substitutes for no. And if it turns out you have a need for what I offer, and you'll be the judge of that, if we get that far, how comfortable will you be sharing the budget you've set up for this project? Just in round numbers. Wait for their answer. They'll usually say, yes, I'd be comfortable, or I'll see when we get to that point. Either of those responses is a signal to move forward. You say, excellent, and before we get started, I'm curious, in addition to yourself, who else will be involved in making this final decision? Wait for their answer. They may just say me, or you might hear, just give the presentation to me and I'll get the information to them. I invite you to check out and review the entire C portion of Quick in the Action Manual and look at all the different scenarios you might face when attempting to deal with decision makers. For our review, though, we'll have the prospect say, "No, it's just going to be me." You respond, "One last favor before we start. If you choose to work with us, I'd be pleased if you'd tell me how you made your choice, and if not, what led you to say no. Is that okay?" "Sure, that's all right." "Okay, that's it for me. Do you want to go first or should I?" Wait for your answer, and most will respond, "Please, you go first." However, sometimes they volunteer to talk. In either case, this is where you take out your note sheet and ask, "When you decided to see me today, what were you hoping I might be able to do for you?" Now wait for their answer. As you're waiting, you can say, "I hope you don't mind if I refer to my notes. I wrote down some stuff to keep me organized," and they'll say, "Sure, go ahead." This is where you start uncovering the problem you'll be called on to resolve. This is where you begin your interview. This is where you start to diagnose. This is where you make or break your sale. Here is where you must think like a doctor. Avoid prescribing before you diagnose. Doctors get information before they give it. Remember that. Think like a doctor. Diagnose before you prescribe. Use the yes formula and then go through each step of Quick. And all I can tell you, and I know I sound like a broken vinyl, that's what they used to call a record, you'll increase your business by 25 to 50% over the next 6 months. And I can pretty much guarantee that because I have clients from the last 30 years who've done exactly that over and over and over again. But what they did was they learned the system and then they used it. It was a change of habit. It was a whole change of mindset on how to sell, but they used it and they were the better for it. If you go back and listen to guests on the podcast, some of them are those very same students that shared with you exactly what a difference this system made in their life. Let this system make a difference for you in your life. I really am excited about you learning this easier way to sell. It will make you a better salesperson. It will make you a more effective salesperson, and you'll live a more profitable life if that's what you're up to. Well, that's going to do it for episode 59 of the Close the Deal Without Selling podcast. We have one more episode to go in this COVID extended season. Please join me as we take a look back on what we've covered and how you can use this system to turn your appointments into sales more easily and more often. I'm going to say it again. It works. All you have to do is use it. One of my clients once said the only problem with Krieger selling is that it only works when you use it. So my final coaching for today's episode is use it. This is Ike Krieger. See you next time.